I'm going to ask you a strange question. Don't you think the most intelligent, the most emotionally self-aware people you know are actually the most exhausted ones? Not because they do too much, but because they think too much. They replay a conversation that ended hours ago, over and over in their minds. They map out scenarios that may never even happen, one by one. They lie awake at 2 in the morning, not because something went wrong, but because their brain simply refuses to stop asking, what if? And right here, my friend, is where the most interesting paradox of psychology begins. The very mental habit that makes someone thoughtful, careful, and empathetic is the exact same thing that silently consumes them. Today, we're going to talk about the psychology of overthinkers, what's actually happening in the brain, why this structure develops, and what this says about you. If you watch this video until the end, I'll explain how you can manage this process better. If you're ready, let's begin. First, let's look at what researchers call it. Psychologists call this maladaptive rumination, the tendency of the mind to repeatedly return to the same loops of thought, especially around uncertainty, past events, or social situations. Research from Yale and the University of Michigan consistently shows that people who ruminate don't do it because they are weak or anxious. In most cases, they do it because their brains are exceptionally good at pattern recognition. The brain is constantly scanning, constantly processing, constantly searching for meaning. The problem isn't intelligence, my friend. The problem is that the system never receives a signal to stop these kinds of thoughts. Neurologically, this is rooted in the prefrontal cortex, the center for planning, analysis, and self-reflection. In overthinkers, this region remains highly active even during downtime. Meanwhile, the brain's background processing system, the default mode network, is constantly generating an internal monologue. The result? A mind that is always on, always auditing, always drafting responses to conversations that haven't even happened yet. And here's the interesting part. This pattern usually doesn't start in adulthood. For the vast majority of overthinkers, this habit begins in childhood or adolescence, mostly in environments where outcomes felt unpredictable and uncertain. The brain of a child raised in a home where moods shifted without warning or where mistakes led to disproportionate consequences learns a very logical survival strategy. The strategy is this: think ahead, foresee everything. If you can predict what's coming, maybe you can protect yourself. From this perspective, overthinking isn't a flaw, it's an adaptation. It's a brilliant nervous system doing exactly what it was trained to do. But you also need to know this: not all overthinking looks the same. Psychologists define it in two different ways. The first is reflective rumination. This is when a person turns inward to understand themselves, process emotions, and make sense of the world. When balanced, this version is actually a source of strength. It's linked to higher emotional intelligence and deep self-awareness. The second is brooding rumination, passive fixation on problems instead of solving them. This is where overthinking begins to take its toll. Sleep quality drops. Decision paralysis sets in. Social anxiety grows from overanalyzing every single interaction. And the hardest part, my friend, is that most overthinkers drift between the two. A single moment of reflection can slide almost invisibly into a spiral. And because thinking feels productive, because the brain is actively engaged, it becomes truly difficult to notice when you've crossed the line from processing to ruminating. Cognitive psychologists call this the illusion of mental progress. The mind feels like it's solving something, but in reality, it's just stuck in a loop. And right there, dopamine enters the picture. The brain releases small amounts of dopamine during the act of problem solving, even during imaginary problem solving. So when an overthinker analyzes a scenario from every angle, the brain is partially rewarded just for the activity itself, not for reaching an answer, but simply for the act of thinking. This is why, my friend, you shouldn't get angry at yourself and say, just stop thinking, because saying that is neurologically nonsensical. The brain has a chemical incentive to keep going. So what does this pattern actually reveal about a person? A 2013 study published in the journal Psychological Science discovered that people who reported higher levels of rumination also scored significantly higher in measures of cognitive empathy, the ability to understand and anticipate how others might think or feel. On average, these individuals are more sensitive to understanding the emotions in people's manners and behaviors. They are more aware of how words are received. The very engine that makes overthinking so exhausting is the same thing that makes these people remarkably perceptive. But perception without a solution is draining, my friend, and that is exactly the tension overthinkers live in. They notice everything. They feel the weight of every possibility, and the more they think, the more the blurriness fails to turn into clarity. Because the quiet truth that psychology constantly returns to is this: the mind cannot think its way out of every problem. Some things must be felt, decided, or let go, not solved. Now I'm going to explain what I promised you at the beginning of the video. Look, if you're a chronic overthinker, you've probably been making the same mistake for years, trying to stop or silence those thoughts. But let me tell you a secret. That is like trying to stop a storm by punching it. You just end up more exhausted. The point isn't actually to destroy those thoughts, it's to fundamentally change your relationship with them. In psychology, we call this cognitive defusion. Do you know what that means? Instead of stepping into the massive chaos swirling in your mind, it's stepping back and simply observing it from the outside, noticing that thought loop without letting it pull you in, just like watching a stranger's car pass by on the street. You start saying to yourself, not, "This situation is very dangerous and I need to find a solution immediately," but simply, "My brain is currently generating a concern scenario." Do you feel the difference? The first sentence imprisons you in the heart of that dark spiral. The second gives you a space where you can breathe independent of that thought. You are not that thought, my friend. You are the observer aware of it. You don't need to break the loop, you just need to step outside of it. "This situation is dangerous and I need to solve it" is replaced by "My brain is generating a concern right now." The first pulls you in. The second gives you a little distance. Everything this points to goes far beyond the individual. Overthinking is not a personality flaw. It's not evidence of instability or weakness. At its core, it is a highly active mind that learned to stay alert in a world that once felt uncertain. The goal isn't to stop thinking entirely. The goal is to slowly and patiently teach that mind, "You are finally safe enough to rest now." How many things on this list described you? Write them in the comments. I'll read them all. Send this video to an overthinker you know. Maybe the solution to the problem is this video. Don't forget to subscribe. The next video might know you even better than this one.